All right, I'm going to get started. I think it was a bad connection there, so I couldn't determine if you guys could actually see it, but I see in the chat that you guys can hear me and see my screen. Okay, so I'll get started unless I see something pop up in the chat. You guys let me know if I start to break up in some way. So my name is Jen Turple. I'm a drug information pharmacist at the IWK, and I'm one of many people who were involved in the creation of the website that I'm going to review with you folks today. I just wanted to get a sense from the people on the line. Is it mostly pharmacists that are on the line? If somebody can just let me know in the chat. You guys know who you are, but I don't know any of you. Is it all pharmacy?
No, nursing also.
Nope.
I think there's some library people
great.
too.
Library and nursing also.
Somebody's mentioned that you can't hear me. It keeps cutting out. Is anyone else having that problem, or is it just a few people?
I think most, okay. I can hear you fine. Okay. So
I can hear.
If you want to show your website again, because you've got the presenter.
As long as you guys can hear me okay in New Brunswick and it works okay in the recording, I think I'll keep going. So we wanted to make sure that anybody who would want to use our open access website understands a few key pieces of information about the website, and that's why we're having this session, in addition to helping people understand how to navigate the content as well. So I'll start with just a little bit of background as to why we developed this website. Back in 2009, the IWK stopped publishing a coil-bound print book that contained our formulary and drug dosing guidelines for neonatal and pediatrics. At the time that we stopped publishing it, it was for obvious reasons. The second you print anything, it's out of date the minute it's printed, and something needs to change. And so we recognized it wasn't a good use of our resources to keep printing anything. So the solution at that time in 2009 was to transition the content to a website, and the only website that we had accessible to us at the IWK was an internal intranet website, which we call Pulse, where we then transitioned our drug dosing guidelines to that website. Now, Pulse is not ideal in the sense that it didn't offer a lot of functionalities that you would expect with a modern day website. And more importantly, it wasn't accessible outside of people who had access to our intranet, so people like you folks in New Brunswick and PEI who do rely on us and look to us for our expertise in neonatal and pediatric and sometimes women's health dosing. So we really needed to get out of our intranet and onto the internet. And so we set about in about 2018 to do that, to develop this website that you see here today, which is open access, meaning that you just need an internet browser and to type in this address, dir.iwk.nshealth.ca, to land here without a subscription, without having to pay, without any login, basically open access information from the IWK perspective. Important to note, it is also mobile friendly, meaning that if you were to open this on your internet browser on a mobile phone, it will present nicely and you can see the content well on a mobile device. So in addition to getting it out there in the world, we also incorporated several safety features into the website that we weren't able to do, which I'll highlight as we go through. So whenever we make something accessible to the world, so to speak, it's important that a disclaimer is understood. And so I'm going to zoom in on this disclaimer at the bottom of the page. For those of you who are in New Brunswick, this disclaimer probably pops up in your face every time you access the website, and that's with very good intent. It's because it really is important that people outside of the IWK understand how they should or shouldn't be using this information when they're accessing it. This was all done, of course, with our legal department to make sure that we had our disclaimer language done well. So I am going to go through it in detail because it is really important, and it's really one of the main reasons why we're having the sessions with people outside of the IWK at this point. So the target end user, the people who we've developed this website for, is healthcare professionals. It's not for patients and families. It's basically anybody who's involved with the prescribing, dispensing, or administration of medications to our distinct patient populations, notably women, neonates, children, and youth. Sorry, I dropped off there. I had to come back on. You can all still see my screen and hear me okay? Yep. Great. Thanks, guys. Sorry for the technical issues. So the information contained on the site is with the following in mind, and this is really important. The only medications that you will find information on in this website are medications that have been approved for use within the IWK, and that's according to our Drugs and Therapeutics Approved Formulary. Many of you know there's Nova Scotia Health Authority in Nova Scotia. They have their own formulary, and then the IWK still maintains its own independent formulary from NSHA. So that's an important basis. Only formulary medications you will find in this website, with a couple of exceptions, which I'll point out later. The information is also very specific to our equipment, policies, procedures, and practice patterns at the IWK. So that includes things like when it comes to our parenteral information, it's with our specific pumps in mind. So we at the IWK have a B-Bron pump that we use, and the content in our parenteral manual has been developed with the functions and possibilities as far as rate limitations, etc., with that specific pump in mind. Of course, we have policies and procedures that dictate how we do things, including how we mix drugs at the IWK, which we'll highlight later, that may or may not apply at other centers. On the formulary note, just to go back to that one, a lot of the information that's now in the new website provides very explicit directions on, for a given strength of drug, for a dose that you need, what volume to use. That, of course, depends on what we stock for concentrations of drugs. For example, you'll see later an example. If we stock 2 milligram per mil lorazepam injectable, currently, which we still do at the IWK, and everywhere else has a 4 milligram per mil lorazepam injectable, it might be risky to use our information on our website without knowing that there's a difference between what you have in your hand in New Brunswick and what we have stocked in Nova Scotia. So we're going to highlight some of these things as we go through just how to use the website, and we're going to try to do as much as we can in an hour. It's a lot to cover. We spent 2 hours, just so you know, describing this to our colleagues at NSHA. So we're going to try to zip through it with you guys in mind. So now, with that said, we're going to talk about what's in the website. So this is our main screen. And you can always get back to the main screen by just clicking on the Drug Information Resource page here at the top. The information now is very distinctly divided out into our neonatal content, our pediatrics, and our women's health information. Our women's health information is not ready for use yet at the IWK. It's still under development. At present, and since mid-February, we've only been using the neonatal and pediatrics content on the website at the IWK. This will probably come in the fall. And so internally at the IWK, again, since February, we've been using this content for our reference for drug dosing and parenteral information. Our timing, of course, wasn't ideal as far as our rollout with COVID coming into the mix. But our plan was always to go live internally, make sure it was working well and usable internally, and then quickly move it out to our counterparts in hospital in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and PEI, and then with a view to move it potentially to community so that we could allow community pharmacists, community pediatricians, nurse practitioners, anyone who would like to use our information with the appropriate education. So that's to follow in time. So right now we're sort of in the midst of making sure we're getting our hospitals taken care of first and foremost, which is why you're here. So I'm now going to dive into using the website proper. The reason why we decided to tease out the patient populations and put the content specific to them into buckets was because in our old presentation of information in Pulse, we would have all the dosing for the various patient populations on one page. And every single clinician in this hospital, I'm sure, had been burned at least once where they wanted the dosing for a pediatric patient for a given drug, and they found themselves writing the order using the neonatal dosing, for example, or pharmacy was checking it looking at the wrong patient population. So as a safety mechanism, we decided to first restructure the way we presented the content by asking clinicians first, tell me what patient population you're looking for. So I'm going to go into our neonatal section to start. And our information looks similar across the patient populations where you have drug dosing guideline information, parenteral information, and then some calculator and administration tools on the right. So I'm going to start in our drug dosing guideline section to review. And an important caveat is about when do we use the neonatal drug dosing guidelines versus pediatrics. And this describes the situations. It's all neonates until they reach a corrected gestational age of 44 weeks and a postnatal age of greater than 4 weeks is when you should be looking at our drug dosing guidelines for our neonates. We also included just a caveat as a reminder to all clinicians that these are just guidelines. They're not the end-all, be-all. There's still a requirement for people to use their clinical judgment, and it might not address all clinical situations. So when you click on the drug dosing guidelines, you're brought to this search field, and you'll see this search field throughout the website. It looks very similar for our parenteral section and our drug dosing guidelines. So there's a few ways that you can now use this search bar. The first way is everything is generic, and there's a few cross-references to other names, including trade names. So for example, if you wanted to look up acetaminophen, you can start to type in the first few letters of the drug, and it will provide you with a drop-down similar to what you'd see in like Google, except this is only presenting to you drugs that start with ACE in this drop-down for which we have neonatal drug dosing guidelines. You won't see any drugs in here if the drug isn't used in the neonatal patient population. It just won't show up in the list. So I'll just start with Tylenol. So you pick the list and then you click search and it brings you to this page. So some of you may have noticed the page when you're in the neonatal section is pink. That's as a visual cue to our end users that you're looking at the neonatal content, in addition to it saying neonatal drug dosing guidelines at the very top of the page. The generic drug name shows up at the top, followed by any indication-specific dosing for that drug. We tried really hard in our new website to standardize the way we represent all of our drug dosing, using as much as possible a milligram per kilogram per dose with a frequency provided, as opposed to what you might have seen or seen in other resources, which is a milligram per kilogram per day or 24-hour representation with a frequency of divided by. The reason we've opted to do this is we're trying to minimize the mathematical and cognitive tasks for our clinicians, where you really only have to do one math here and then write the frequency, as opposed to doing the 24-hour calculation and then doing a second mathematical division by the frequency. So you'll see throughout we've tried really hard to standardize things as mgs per kg per dose or mics per kg per dose, whichever applies. And so this is the general layout of the acetaminophen drug dosing guideline. We do provide a hyperlink, where applicable, to the equivalent dosing guideline in our pediatric patient population so that you could jump to pediatric drug dosing from here. I won't show you that just yet, but just know that this will only appear if that same drug has dosing in the pediatric section. So for example, if I was in caffeine in our neonatal drug dosing section, there is no link to a pediatric drug dosing guideline for caffeine because we don't use that drug in our pediatric patient population. At the bottom of the page, we include our supplied as. So this is all of the dosage forms that we provide at the IWK according to our formulary somewhere in the hospital. So all of these forms, the formats and the associated strengths show up at the bottom of the page. It doesn't mean for us, just so people are aware, that this is what we stock in our NICU because we're in the neonatal section. It's just pulling everything what we have somewhere in the building here so that people know what we have accessible on our formulary and in stock. I'll just highlight anything that we have IWK compounded beside means that we either purchase this made from a compounding pharmacy or we make it in-house within the IWK. So suppositories in 30 and 60 strength, we are purchasing from a compounding pharmacy, and that's why you see IWK compounded after those two strengths specifically. That's just to remind and let all clinicians know that you won't find this in the real world, so to speak, at a regular community pharmacy. These are unique to the IWK as a compounded product. From here, if you wanted to then search another drug in our neonatal drug dosing guidelines, you can quickly just go to search another drug and you get taken back to the search field. I'll show you another way that you can search. I mentioned very selectively we've cross-referenced generic names to other names that people might use. So as you know, many clinicians aren't aware that a drug like sodium polystyrene sulfonate is K-oxalate. So I believe you will see if I start to type in K using the other name, it cross-references to direct clinicians, do you want this? Are you looking for sodium polystyrene? And then they can also search this way. While I'm on this page, I'll just highlight this icon, which shows up beside the generic drug name. It is a set of kidneys, in case you're not familiar with what it is. And when you hover over it, it reminds clinicians that dose adjustments and renal impairment may be required. The drug dosing guidelines, as we indicated in the previous, do not cover all clinical scenarios, and renal impairment is one of them. We cannot provide direction through our dosing guidelines for all adjustments for all drugs in renal impairment. Therefore, the best we can do is say you need to go look at other references if you need to adjust in the case of a renal impairment patient to get the right dosing or frequency for this medication. If you were to type in a name, let's just say you wanted to find out how to dose ampicillin. You can see I've purposefully typed it incorrectly because I want to show you what happens when you search incorrectly. It basically says you searched ampicillin and it's not found in our drug dosing guidelines. So it's saying a couple of things might be the reason why you're not getting a hit. Either you've spelt it incorrectly, which is of course the case here, or you're looking at this drug in the wrong patient population. So this would be an example like I provided earlier. Had I been right now in our drug dosing guidelines and I put caffeine in, you would get the same message, but the reason you aren't seeing a hit is because we don't use caffeine in the pediatric patient population. So just so you know, if you get this hit, there's usually one of these scenarios that's been met. If neither of these are the situation, the drug just might not be on our formulary. And that's why you can't find any information about the drug. Again, in this example, I spelled it wrong on purpose just to show you less is more as you're starting to type in here, and picking from the drop-down is best to avoid having a spelling error and not finding what you want. Ampicillin, I'm going to just show you how we have all of our antimicrobials structured in our website. We subscribe to Spectrum, which is an app and a desktop application that's already has supported our drug dosing for all of our antimicrobials since 2016 at the IWK. And so because we already have all of that content living in there, to avoid having to maintain our drug dosing guidelines and our drug dosing content in Spectrum, you will see that in most of our drug dosing guidelines, there is but a hyperlink to our dosing that already lives in Spectrum. So you can see by clicking on this link, we're now in spectrum, where we've landed on our neonatal ampicillin dosing for reference, instead of having it in two places and having to maintain two places. Occasionally, you'll see additional dosing information that's not contained in Spectrum, but for the most part, I'd say 95% of our drugs only include a hyperlink to Spectrum when it's an antimicrobial, and there's nothing more there. So that's just a little bit on the search fields and how to look up information. I'll highlight a few more things as far as the way that the information is presented in the website. So I'll just show you caffeine to show how we try to include information that's important to prescribers, in particular around how to dose the drug properly. So things like if we want to provide direction about the doses being expressed as milligrams of caffeine as base, or for example, using a lot of our electrolytes where we say, or minerals where we say dosing is provided in elemental. For example, that would be included at the top, and other important and helpful information to let other people know how we do things, which includes we use the injectable form of caffeine orally by mouth, and so you will see the only format that we have supplied as a result is the injection. And at present, it is still special access, although it is coming to market in Canada. And so you will also see that we flagged any drug that is on formulary that is special access in green with special access beside it. I'll also use this example of caffeine to highlight a very new feature in the website, which is the availability of our order set content on our website. So IWK's order sets traditionally lived in a system that was uniquely available just to us, and it was impossible for other centers to see our order set for a given drug or condition. With the new website, we are able to have a link for view-only purposes to our order set content. And so I'm going to show you in this order set, which is our NICU admission order, we now have the ability to allow other people to see the contents of this order set. And the reason this is linked in particular is because we were in the caffeine drug dosing guideline, and this is where we've housed our drug dosing information for caffeine. So again, we're trying to establish a source of truth, if you will, for where the dosing lives. If we have an order set that speaks to it, we will hyperlink to that order set, and we will just perpetually maintain the order set content. As we update these order sets, the link automatically updates, so you're always seeing the most current version of our order set from this hyperlink on our website. So we perceive this to be a significant advantage to our external sites, because we were often getting calls pretty much weekly from outside the hospital saying, can you send me a copy of your order set for blank? And so this is helpful. Again, this is a view-only access. We don't use this in practice. We don't print this and use this from the website. We still have to go through our usual processes internally to get it ready for use in the patient's chart, where we do still are paper-based here. So just a couple of other features at the top of our drug dosing guidelines that I'll highlight. If a drug is been deemed high alert, for example, epinephrine is high alert, it will say at the very top of the page in red that the drug is high alert. Of course, this is based on IWK's high alert drug list, which may or may not translate to high alert designations outside of our hospital. So this is epinephrine, of course, has various indications, so you can see how they all present with different indications and different qualifiers, including routes of admin on this page. So I'm going to stop there to see if anyone has any questions so far, just with what I've presented in the neonatal drug dosing guidelines section. If you're all good, you can put an emoji. If I'm going too fast, you can let me know too. So far, so good? No questions? Okay, I'll take the silence as everything's okay. Oh, good, thank you. Okay. All right, so I'll carry on, and I'm just going to go now in to show you pediatrics. And I'm going to go into the drug dosing guidelines again, just to show you it looks very similar to where we just were in our neonatal drug dosing guidelines, except now the background is yellow, and you're being reminded that you're in the pediatrics section. This search field works exactly the same as all of our other, as the other one we just reviewed. So I'll show you some examples in here. So I'm going to show you, I'm picking aripiprazole in our pediatric section. So you can imagine if I had typed aripiprazole in neonatal, it wouldn't hit because we don't use aripiprazole, a psychotropic drug, in our neonatal population. Only the drugs for which we use in the pediatric section appear in the drop-down for this section as an additional safety feature. And because at the IWK, we really don't have the resources to keep up on all the ways that we're using psychotropic drugs in our pediatric and adolescent patient population, what we decided to adopt as a resource, as our go-to resource for drug dosing in this patient population is a textbook called the Clinical Handbook of Psychotropic Drugs in Children and Adolescents, a textbook that the editor is actually two pharmacists, one of which used to work here at the IWK. And so we haven't regurgitated all the drug dosing for aripiprazole here. You will see that we have a hyperlink to this reference. What that means is this is where people need to be referring to the dosing for aripiprazole. And what that means is if you are an organization using this website and you do not subscribe to an IP authenticated subscription to this reference like we do, this link will go nowhere. And so you will not have access to how we dose the drugs unless you have this textbook to refer to in print or otherwise. So that it would be something that individual organizations would need to consider whether or not they would like to consider subscribing to it. So this link works for the purposes of seeing how we would dose drugs in the IWK. So that's some information on our pediatric drug dosing guidelines for psychotropics. They all appear like that. Again, if we did have a order set to support a psychotropic drug, this would also appear there in addition to the hyperlink to that reference. Some new features in our website when we transitioned that didn't exist in Pulse before was we really expanded the kind of information that we provided around drug dosing. So a lot of drugs that we used in oncology, we didn't typically include in our drug dosing guidelines. And we've made a concerted effort to try to include information on dosing for not just supportive care, but for the chemotherapy itself, including hyperlinks to AFON guidelines where they apply. So this is Navalone, for example. But we also historically never included any information on the chemotherapy itself. And that's because it was mostly as far as how we were dosing it from the perspective of prescribing and checking and administering was driven by COG protocols. And so all we've done now in the new website is we've put an entry in it because it is on our formulary. We've designated it as being, of course, high alert and on our hazardous list at the IWK that we've determined based on our IWK policy. This is an example of a drug that's reserved and restricted. So any drugs that's reserved or restricted to either a prescribing group or a care area will show up underneath the drug in orange. And then in this case, again, because COG is where you will find the information on how to dose it, the only thing that we've provided is a hyperlink to the login page for those who have access to COG to then go look up the specific protocol for which ETOP is being used. And our hazardous drug classification, this is taking you to Pulse, which also would be a link that wouldn't work for places outside. And this is our how we've classified our formulary chemotherapy and hazardous medications by cytotoxic and non-cytotoxic with the different risks within each category. And this is where we would look to see how we handle the drugs, both from a pharmacy, delivery, administration, disposal perspective. We will be eventually migrating this content to the new website so that it doesn't live in Pulse. But for now, if you guys are trying to access that content, it won't take you in because it lives within Pulse. Just for other information, we do have vaccine and immunization information now on our website that didn't typically live on our Pulse content. So we include information on our routine immunization schedules in Nova Scotia, of course, so you can see the schedules and what's been approved. And also hyperlinks to the immunization guidelines or order sets that exist to support the administration of vaccines and immunizations within the health center. So there's a lot of new content for any of you who might have had access to our Pulse content previously that didn't exist before. So I'm not going to spend much more time talking about our drug dosing guideline. I guess the only other thing I'll mention is with respect to antidotes. So as many of you know, we have the IWK houses a regional poison information center. We do hyperlink to information about the poison center and antidote use for drugs that are used as antidotes from the drug dosing guidelines. We don't maintain that drug dosing content or the information on how to mix it. That is all provided through our antidote kit website, and so we merely hyperlink out so people can refer to that for both dosing and mixing instructions for drugs that are used in the context of overdose or as an antidote. So I'm going to stop there to see if there's any other questions before I move on to the parenteral information. And question to Laurie Legier, does Horizon have access to this reference? Oh, you're asking about the psychotropic drug. Okay, great. Great. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to our parenteral information. And before I do this, I'm going to ask Lynn to just give a really quick, and Lynn, if you could blow through this because we're short on time. Lynn Hustis is on the line, I believe. She is responsible for our pump and drug library maintenance. And I really wanted to make sure people understand how we do things with respect to our pumps and how we prepare drugs at the IWK before we show you the parenteral information. So Lynn, over to you.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me.
Yep.
Before I start, I have a dog that has figured out that if he barks, he gets fed while I'm on a Skype call. So I apologize if he starts barking. Prior to 2010, we used Buretrols. They were not a great way to administer medications. There were issues with proper mixing and flushing, and the vents were unsafe. So when we were looking at new pumps, we decided that we would go with syringe pumps and get rid of our Buretrols, as well as introducing smart pump technology or dose error reduction system. And so we removed the volumetric cylinders or Buretrols from all the pediatric care areas. And along with doing that, we had to introduce standard concentrations. So Ben, can you just flip to the next? So we were using the rule of 6 for preparing our continuous infusions. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but it's basically a calculation that allows us to mix a certain amount of drug based on a patient's weight in a certain volume so that 1 ml per hour will deliver the desired dose rate. So ISMP came out that, that was not safe. And so another reason to move to the dose error reduction system or smart pumps. So going to standard concentrations, Dan, I might have to get you to take over if he keeps talking.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you will. I think he's not going to stop.
Okay, I'll try my best. So I'm not sure which bullet you left off on specifically, but we needed to reduce the risk of input errors when programming pumps, and by having standard concentrations, it supported that. It allowed us to have better fluid control in pediatric populations, recognizing that depending on how we mixed it, we might fluid overload a patient based on the way we dosed it. And it also set us up well to make our SIVA program much more efficient because we prepare bulk bags of standard concentrations and then draw off patient-specific doses under sterile conditions. So again, all of our drugs in SIVA are prepared patient-specific, dose-specific, volume-specific based on a standard concentration. The vast majority of our intermittent doses that we're providing IV are administered on our syringe driver, on our syringe pump, and we're preparing them in syringes as opposed to bags, the vast majority. Anything that is in more than 50 mils is prepared by adding the volume of drug and the volume of solution to get to standard into an empty sterile bag, as long as the medication port does not have to be accessed more than 3 times. And then that would be administered on a large volume pump. So this is how we handle what goes on the syringe driver and what goes on the large volume pump. Just important to note, if a commercial bag, IV bag is being used, the average overfill volume, of course, needs to be considered, or there will be undelivered med after the programmed infusion is completed. And then we don't really support the preparing of a larger volume with the intention of delivering a portion of the bag, because we just feel it creates an unnecessary risk of a patient receiving an overdose, which is why we hang a volume-specific, dose-specific, patient-specific dose. So we do things maybe differently than other centers because of all this. We draw up the volume of an additive and a diluent in separate syringes. And so the diluent syringe size should be the smallest syringe size that accommodates the dose. We attach the fluid dispensing connector to a diluent syringe, and there's a picture of one of those there. And then the syringe containing the additive is connected to the end of the fluid dispensing connector, and we transfer the contents into the diluent syringe and remove the additive syringe, leaving the fluid dispensing connector on the diluent syringe. And then we pull back the plunger of the diluent syringe to allow a little bit of air, and cap the syringe. We rotate it and then remove the cap, prime the medication to the tip of the syringe at the time we're ready to administer. So I'm not sure how that translates to work that you guys are doing as far as how you guys do things within New Brunswick. And it might be different even site by site. In New Brunswick, we're not really sure either. So there's also the matter of differences in pumps. So we have an issue a little bit in this province because NSHA is rolling out a different pump than what we have. So we have, of course, as mentioned, the Bebron Infuser syringe pumps that deliver doses as low, volumes as low as 0.01 mils per hour. And our NSHA colleagues have pumps that will only deliver as low as 0.1 mils per hour. And we've selected our standard concentrations that you'll see in our parenteral section based on those capabilities to administer at that low of a rate. And so for that reason, it may not, because syringe pumps may or may not be available in other centers, what we provide for our concentrations may result in dose volumes that are not ideal for mixing in bags. So that's just a few things that I want you to know about before we go back to talking about the parenteral section. And I'm going to try to highlight where this might come up for you guys throughout. So I'm going to spend the last little while talking about the parenteral guidelines, and I'm just going to pick pediatrics, but know that the same principles that I'm showing in pediatrics also applies to the neonatal section. Just a word of caution about our parenteral information that we are going to show you. This corresponds to our Bebron infusion devices specifically and libraries within that Bebron infusion device. So we have different categories of libraries within the Bebron Smart Drug library, and it does correspond to our pediatric PICU and ED libraries. What's notably not there are things like our pediatric OR, our palliative care library, and the antidote library. We know that they just do, quite frankly, different things because of the clinical context they have to, and we don't try to cover that off in our parenteral information, but this does represent the way we do things in our general pediatrics and PICU wards as far as the parenteral guidance. So the search field looks very similar to the search field that you saw previously. This time you're only seeing medications that have a parenteral route. So of course you won't see aripiprazole in here. And when you type it, it's not going to be in the list. But we do have information on our parenteral drugs. So I'm going to show you azithromycin to start. And this is now our parenteral information. Again, background is yellow. We're in the pediatric section, but now we're looking at parenteral information at the top. Generic drug name is there at the top. A general classification follows underneath. Any drug that's a known extravasant or irritant shows up with this flag at the top of the monograph for the information of staff to perhaps be checking sites more frequently, IV sites. There is a hyperlink from the parenteral section to the drug dosing guidelines. So you can see I'm jumping from the parenteral information to the drug dosing content, and I'm going to go back to the parenteral information again. The reason this is at the top is because we want to ensure that prior to anybody mixing a medication on the floor from the Pyxis machine, because they would do that before SIVA doses get prepared, you need to make sure the dose is correct. Obviously, it should be reviewed by pharmacy, but after hours, the responsibility is for nursing to check the dose against the drug dosing guidelines before they mix the drug. The last thing anyone wants to do is mix the drug only to realize that the dose is wrong and they have to throw it out. The next section of information is IWK specific directions on how to reconstitute any drug that comes as a powder. So azithromycin is in a powder format in the vial. It describes the route of admin and the reconstitution instructions specific to that route, the strength or format of the vial, the volume of the diluent, which is in italics here, and then the resulting concentration in the vial once it's been mixed according to those instructions. The next section describes how we have supported and endorsed it be used in the health center, and this again corresponds to our drug library entries. So for azithromycin, there is only one approved route of administration that we are supporting and endorsing, which is IV intermittent infusion, and so you only see that. In our old content that we used to have a series of, and some centers do this, they have a series of a chart which will include a variety of routes of admin, for example, IV direct, continuous infusion, intermittent, and it will say yes, no, you can do this, you can't do that. We've opted in the new website to only include the things that we allow. So we're not saying no, we're not repeatedly saying you can't do it this way, we're just saying what you can do with the expectation that our nursing staff, if need to administer it differently or want to administer it differently, would have to ask pharmacy if that's okay. So again, you only see the routes of administration that are supported and endorsed within the hospital included in pink. It's immediately followed by the IWK standard concentrations, so how the drug should be mixed every time. I'm going to skip the prep calculator to just show the administration duration. So this is how long the minimum number which the drug should be administered over. We don't include ranges, we just include the minimum. So it can't be given any faster than an hour. And it's standardly represented in HHMM, which corresponds with the entry on our BBRON infusion device when a nurse programs the pump. This monitoring section is a work in development. We're working to adopt for our parenteral drugs level assignments where certain things should be monitored with a certain frequency while it's being administered. Just know that this is a work in progress and there's lots of policy changes at the IWK and these aren't being implemented as they are written just yet. I'm going to go back up now to show you one of the main features that we've added, which is the preparation calculator. So this calculator is here really to support nursing staff predominantly, but also anybody who would be trying to mix the medication on how to get a given drug at a standard concentration. So there's some math involved with getting from what the product comes as, which is 100 milligram per mil after reconstitution, down to what you need it to be in this case, which is 2 milligrams milligram per ml. So to support that math, we have integrated these calculators where the nurse is asked to enter the dose that's been ordered, and I don't even know if that makes sense as a dose, so don't get too fussed about it. And what it's doing is it's providing explicit direction based on how we mix drugs, which we just reviewed, which is you're telling the nurse what volume of drug to remove from the vial, what volume of diluent or compatible solution to add to the drug to get to the standard concentration, and the total volume that they're going to have in syringe, in this case, to administer the full 100 milligram dose at a concentration of 2 milligram per ml. So in order to determine the compatible solutions that they can mix to get to standard, it provides a list of options. It's really only drugs for which it's obviously compatible, and it's not intended to be every single solution known to man. It's really only for the purpose of diluting to standard. So we've tried to include, where applicable, a saline, a dextrose, and ringers. You won't find here a long list of things like 2/3, 1/3, D5 half normal. That's beyond the purpose of what this is for. Again, just to get to standard concentration in your syringe or bag. If you're looking for further information around Y-site compatibility with whatever fluid or drug, this is where we hyperlink out at the bottom of the monograph to Micromedics, where the expectation is that staff would be using our drug compatibility section to then verify what's compatible at Y-site or for drugs or fluids. So that's some of the functionality. If you were to have entered this dose incorrectly, let's say you didn't mean to put in 100, you're like, oh shoot, the dose is actually 110. The website is set up so that you can't re-enter a number in this unless you click reset as a safety mechanism to make sure that you are always redoing the calculations, again, to ensure you're calculating the right dose. And you can see this is now changed to reflect the new reflects the new dose. So I'm going to quickly show you another example. I'll go into ampicillin because I just want to highlight a little bit about a drug that has different routes of administration and different supplied as. So this is ampicillin, and now I'm in the neonatal parenteral section. So it looks similar. Ampicillin in our hospital, we use it both for the IM route and the IV route. And so you can see that, and there's also 2 different vial sizes. So now, unlike azithromycin where there was just one reconstitution, there's now 4 different options for staff to consider. They have to pay attention to make sure they're looking at the right route of administration, and they have to pay attention to make sure they're looking at the right vial size. We do things a little bit differently at the IWK with respect to our reconstitution instructions. We don't necessarily follow what's on the vial provided by the manufacturer. We sometimes change things. For example, I believe you won't find this on the side of a vial anywhere for any of the current companies that make ampicillin. We do this to allow us to get to 100 milligram per ml by adding an appropriate volume, which might again be different than what the side of the vial says. So that might be unique to us as well. And then again, because we allow for the IM route, we need a more concentrated format to allow for acceptable volumes to be administered IM. And so there is different reconstitution instructions for that. So I'll just carry on to show you how the calculator looks different for this example. So take note, our IV direct is an acceptable route of admin for ampicillin, and the standard concentration is 100 milligram per ml when it's administered IV, which is what you get after you reconstitute the vial, right? So up here, once reconstituted for IV route, you're getting 100 milligrams per ml, no matter the strength of vial. So whenever it's a straight draw from a vial or a bag, you will see the standard concentration followed by this as a cue that you don't need to dilute to a standard. You're ready to go. It's a straight draw from the vial once reconstituted, or in some cases a straight draw from a bag. And that's a cue, again, no further calculations required, which is why this calculator if I were to put in a dose, looks very different. It's one line and it's really basic. It's just saying to get 176 milligrams, you're going to take 1.76 mils out of that vial that you've reconstituted as a straight draw. So that's how that looks a little bit different. And then you can see, depending on the indication, there might be different ways that it can be given. So this is our general dosing of ampicillin, as opposed to our meningitic dosing. And there's different ways that it has to be administered per IWK based on that qualifier. So for our nursing staff, it's really important that they understand they're looking at all the options and ensuring they're picking the right option to provide the direction on how to administer it and the correct calculators and or admin times. So here's an example of the IM calculator. Again, if you've reconstituted it to the IM reconstitution instructions above, it's ready to go in the vial, and you can put the dose in here. I'm going to purposely put a dose in that's really low to show you what the calculator does when you put in an immeasurable dose. So this doesn't make sense, I know, this dose of 2 milligrams, but I wanted to show you that we've set throughout the website threshold of 0.1 mils as our measurability threshold. And any calculation that is below 0.1 will show up in red. And so in this case, when you put 2 milligrams in and saying, whoa, this is what you get, but how are you going to do that? And what we say to our nursing staff is if you're using this, it's a pretty good indication that you might want to go back and check your dose. That there might be a problem with the dose, because generally speaking, we know how we use the drugs, we know what strengths are available. We wouldn't have selected the concentration if we knew it would result in immeasurable volumes. So if you see it, check your dose. If you still see it after you've checked your dose, call pharmacy for direction. I'll show you what that looks like if you were doing a drug intermittently, and I have to speed up because we're going to run out of time. So let me think. I'll go back into azithromycin just for demonstration purposes. So remember, azithromycin was a little bit different because there is a standard concentration. If I in here put in a really low dose, let's see if I can make it do it. No, I got to go lower. Oh no, that did it. So no, I got to go lower. Sorry, just bear with me. There we go. So what this is doing is I put in 5 milligrams, and so it's trying to calculate how to get 5 milligrams out of 100 milligram per mil. And of course, that would be immeasurable, right? If you were to do that math to try to get 500 out of this, it's going to be less than 0.1. So what the website is actually doing here to support the calculation is it's saying, okay, let's just do what we can do. Measure out 0.1 mils out of your azithromycin 100 milligram per mil vial, add it to 4.9 mils of a compatible solution to give a 5 mil syringe. Now everything is showing up in red because it's saying, hey, you just made more than you need actually to get your 5 milligram dose. Now, after you've done that dilution, you're going to take 2.5 mils off of your 5 mil prepared syringe in order to get this dose. So it's sort of doing a dilution and then you're taking off a volume to facilitate measurability. Again, so when you see the red with this kind of calculation, first check your dose to make sure it's correct, and then be sure to pay attention to the withdraw the volume off. There are occasional situations in our drug dosing guidelines where we do this, and it is correct. It's the only way we can deliver the drug. Dexamethasone in our NICU is an example of one where we have to do this. It's not an error. It's the only way we can deliver the drug is by diluting it and then withdrawing the appropriate volume off of a prepared syringe at a certain concentration. Lastly, I'll show you how our calculator works for a drug run continuously, because this is slightly different. So epinephrine, I'll show you what it looks like as a continuous infusion. So again, this is the approved route of admin. There are 2 different concentrations that we've selected at the IWK based on a qualifier, which is weight. So that's why you see 2 different options for IV continuous. One for patients less than or equal to 20, where the standard concentration is 0.05 milligram per mil, and an IV continuous patients greater than 20 kilos, where the standard concentration is 0.2 milligrams per mil. It's really important that nursing staff, if using our calculators, are selecting the right option. Otherwise, if they use the calculator, it's going to be doing the math based on the inappropriate standard concentration. So what that means is here, if you are now asked to put in a weight as opposed to the intermittent, which was requesting for somebody to input a dose, you should be only putting a weight in that corresponds with the header, meaning I should be putting in a weight less than or equal to 20 here. The computer system, unfortunately, is not smart enough at this point to say, if I put in 25 kilos here, that's incongruent with this section. So you have to pay attention to make sure you're launching the right calculator. And for our continuous infusions, what the calculator is now doing is it's taking an average dose of epinephrine that we've assigned in pharmacy behind the scenes in this calculator, and it's saying you're going to take a volume of epinephrine using the 1 milligram per mil to give a 2 mils of drug added to 38 mils of compatible diluent, exactly the same as before. And that should be enough to get you started at standard concentration for a 15 kilo patient requiring epinephrine. I say get you started because if a patient is not on an average dose, they're on a high dose in our PICU, for example, they might be, it might be under-calculating a syringe volume to prepare. This calculator is also doing lots of fancy things in the background. We have the ability to restrict what can be a maximum volume in syringe to prepare. For example, generally speaking, we only allow our pressor drugs to be administered on a syringe driver. And so you won't see the calculator do any calculation greater than 50 mils because that's been our organizational decision, which may or may not apply. Importantly, throughout all the website, because all of the calculations for all the drugs are being done on the basis of what we stock at the IWK, it's really important for anybody else using our website to understand this may not be what you stock, therefore this might not work for your use. This is up to individual organizations to decide if it does work for them and really make a decision whether or not people should be using this information in direct care. It's one thing if pharmacy might use it as a reference to go on to make decisions, but its applicability in patient care really needs to be thoughtfully reviewed by each site who looks at this information. Sorry about all the emails coming up about scheduling. This is really important for people to consider, and it's the last thing I'm going to show you, which is also really important for people to understand, is our pediatric calculators. And then I'll stop because I know I've gone over a bit. This is our pediatric dosing and administration calculator tools that we've developed specific to the way we manage PALS, anaphylaxis, and status epilepticus at the IWK. And you can see there's other supporting calculator tools, including our approved BSA calculator and our EGFR calculator in pediatrics. I'm going to focus on the PALS calculator. There's 2 different ways you can present the information, but they show the exact same content, one which is conducive to a mobile phone view and one which is conducive to a print. So I'm going to just pull up print to show you that this requires just a few key pieces of information to be entered. The weight times 2. And when you hit calculate, this is providing a list of IWK's modified 2015 PALS list alphabetically with the equivalent doses and volumes based on our concentrations that would be given in the context of a code. And so this is, for example, adenosine. It's at 1 mg per kg, 0.1 mg per kg. So the dose for 15 kilo is 1.5 milligrams. We stock a 3 milligram per mil concentration, so that is equivalent to a 0.5 mil volume. Nobody else should be using this unless they have validated that these concentrations are the exact same as what we stock and use at the IWK. Similarly, the anaphylaxis medications below and our approved status epilepticus content and dosing with associated volumes. Remember I mentioned earlier, if you don't stock lorazepam 2 milligram per mil and you have 4, if you just blindly followed this volume, you would overdose a patient using a 4 milligram per mil concentration. So these are all important things that we want people who can see our content to really internalize before they use the information or suggest that their services or care areas use the information at face value. I'm going to stop there to see if there's any questions, and I know you want to probably move on with your day. I'm happy to stay on to show you a little bit of what's in the formulary module if anybody wants to, but I'll just stop to see if there's any questions.
This is Ashley. I'm the parental services coordinator. I just wanted to highlight that it's really important, some of the messages that you have there in terms of mixing. So for anyone in Horizon and or in Vitalite, you look in the PDM for our large volume pumps, we have how to mix standard concentrations in pediatrics, because similar to what you guys are facing, the large volume pumps only go to a rate of 0.1 mils per minute. So we have to obviously adjust our concentrations for that. And certain centers, we do have the syringe pumps. So it's definitely, some of this information is very useful for us. So thank you for presenting.
No problem. And thanks, Scott. I see your comment about Tazocin. Yes, we struggled with the whole piperacillin component and the concentration being represented as piperacillin component. So yeah, we find it helpful as well. Just for the pharmacy people in the room, does anyone want me to show you very quickly if time allows for people to stay on the formulary module, or would you like me to shut it down now, Heather?
I have to sign off myself to get to RAM, so I'll have to stop the recording here. But if people want to stay on the line and watch, they're welcome to if your time allows. We just won't have this last portion recorded.
Okay, great. So I will just quickly, in like 2 minutes, show you the formulary functionality. Our compounding formulas that we currently have on our IWK website for our oral compounds